Hey everyone, welcome back to the Jewish Bowman. Today I have a question from one of my friends that was asked regarding the nation spread around the whole earth, coming from Ham, Shem, and Japheth after the flood of the whole earth. Well, first off, God, after God's furious wrath was poured out on the earth, and after God wiped out a huge, severe amount of people on the earth, only 8 people survived. That was Noah and his wife and his 3 sons, along with their wives. And in Genesis chapter 9, verse 19, it says that from those sons, the whole earth was populated. And so the question comes, so how do we have different races right now, and how are there different nations right now? Well, I think, but first we have to examine the text and look and see what the text actually says. And there appears to be a contradiction to the naked eye if you read up and down Genesis chapter 10. It says that these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, when they began to populate the earth. It says that the sons of Japheth were Gomer, and he just gives you the genealogy and the generations. Japheth bore so-and-so bore so-and-so, and Ham bore so-and-so, and Shem bore so-and-so. But then it says each person according to their language, according to their family, according to their nation. Now keep in mind that the Tower of Babel has not yet happened yet. Now let's look at Genesis chapter that was Genesis chapter 10, where Shem, Ham, and Japheth, each of them went to populate the earth, and it says that each of them had a different spoke a different language and spoke and from these 3 there came coastland of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Well, Genesis chapter 11 says the whole earth used the same language, and the whole earth used the same words. And so, I don't think that there's a contradiction here. Now, it may appear like a contradiction, because wait a second, in Genesis chapter 10 he says that each man is separated unto their language, unto their nation. But in Genesis chapter 11 it says the whole earth used the same language. Well, Genesis chapter 11 is, in a way, looking back at an important point in history. And Genesis chapter 11 is really another curse on man. Really another curse on man. But let's look at Genesis chapter 10 real quick. Let's look at one quick genealogy from Ham. This is important for our narrative. The sons of Ham were Cush and Mizraim, and Put in Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba and Sabata and Ramah. And it says, now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And then it goes on to talk about all the other genealogies. Now what's interesting to note is in Genesis chapter 11, he mentions the same exact character named Nimrod. And then and also in Genesis chapter 10, he mentions the Tower of Babel. In Genesis chapter 11, he's talking about the Tower of Babel. So obviously what he's doing is he's going back in time to give you an important point in history. Now, I will make another point to you. I do not think that in Genesis chapter 10, when it said that the sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Havan, and from these coastlands of the nations, each man were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Now, do I think at that time period, at that specific time period, there was different languages? Do I think that in that specific time period there were different nations? Absolutely not. The earth was too new. Earth was too new. Everything was new. Shem, Ham, and Japheth just got off the ark, and this civilization was just starting to kick off. Now, I don't believe that there were different languages either. I don't believe that there were different nations. I believe that everything was just starting to kick off, if you will. I also don't believe that different nations just show up automatically. No, they have to progress over a time. So obviously, when the text is saying that from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, each one according to their own language, according to their families, into their nations, I believe that that happened after Nimrod. After Nimrod. So, to understand this text better, we can simply say that Ham, Shem, and Japheth, which existed at the same time after the flood, bore children, okay, and from their children, they all were part of the same language, until, okay, from Ham there came a man named Nimrod, and this man named Nimrod built a tower to try to compete with God. And then God said, I was going to scatter them abroad over the face of the earth. And then from the face of the earth, they're going to scatter upon each one is going to have their own nations, and that's going to progress into their own separate lands. Because it doesn't make sense for me to read this text and say, well, according to his language, according to their families, into their nations, when there weren't nations to begin with, because they weren't scattered yet. So obviously, Moses' writing this is looking back on how civilization started. So Moses is simply taking note and saying, yeah, through Nimrod, all the nations, people were scattered through Nimrod. But through Nimrod, I'm looking back and I can see how from Ham, this nation, and these nations, each one has their own nations because of that one event through Nimrod. Now, if we understand this, and if we can kind of drain this into our heads, and the reason why I say this is because if you read Nimrod's account, after Nimrod's account, it says, these are the records of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, the father of Asparaj, 2 years after the flood. So, obviously, Nimrod was not 2 years old, but I also think that nations were starting to separate out. They're starting to separate out. And I think that Nimrod happened over many, I think nations separate out after one event in history, which is Nimrod, the scattering of people. And so, and then, of course, then there's the obvious of Shem. From Shem came a guy named Peleg. And Peleg is interesting because it said they named him Peleg for in his days the earth was divided. So obviously something dramatically took place in his days that the earth was divided. Now what took place? Now let's look at the point in history that happened in Nimrod. So after all that background, let's look at chapter 11, verse 1. Going back in time to Nimrod. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east, and they found a place in the land of Shinar, and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks, and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they begin to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. And there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. And then, from that point in time, you can go back to chapter 10 and read, okay, these are the sons of Ham according to their family, according to their language, according to their nation, because of what happened with Nimrod. Now, keep on reading. Now, that's basically what it is. And one other point to mention is verse 4. Come, let us build for ourselves the city and tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, others will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Again, this was not irritating to God in the sense that they were building a tower, but it was more irritating to God in the sense that they were competing with God in a way, and they were challenging God, and God doesn't like challenges. And so, and another thing, God also doesn't like people who oppose Him. And these people were obviously rebellious, and not just rebellious, but they wanted to rival God in a way. They wanted to compete with Him, and God is a jealous God. So God has no rivals and no rebels. So the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which has been built. Behold, they are one people, and they will have the same language. And this is what they begin to do. And now nothing when they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Kind of reminds you of the garden, right? When God told Adam, when God sent the garden angels to guard the way to the tree of life. Why? Because if man partakes, he has become like one of us, and he might showcase him to eat and live forever. In a sense, it is that way, but in a sense, it's also a judgment on these people. But it's also in a sense that he doesn't want any rivals. He wants to be the only one that with that kind of power. And in the sense, it is true. If God were to continue to let these people do what they want to do, having the same mind, having the same language, having the same nation, being so united, what they purpose to do and what they purpose to conquer will be unparalleled. It will be a different kind. And so God says, no, I had it with these people and scattered their languages. So that's basically the Tower of Babel, and hope that made sense regarding the nations of the earth. If you have any more questions, just let me know. And hope to be getting to Abraham pretty soon. And that's pretty much all for today. And hope everyone's having a great day.